Hey everyone, a really warm welcome back to the channel. Well, over the last few weeks I've been finishing up some data analysis of some science experiments I did on this very caravan over last winter whilst we were in lockdown. Yeah, there are 35,000 odd data points. It's taken me a while to get it all sorted out. So the experiment I wanted to do was to look at whether we should be using desiccated crystals or dehumidifiers or putting the heating on or whatever while we're storing our caravans over the winter. And there's lots of hearsay about that online, so I thought it was high time we had some proper scientific data, or at least the sort of data I could manage with fairly cheap instrumentation rather than proper lab grade, robust, thousands of pounds worth of scientific instrumentation. Anyway, so those are the experiments. And there is an enormously long video coming out in about 15 minutes, which covers all that in great detail for all of those that are interested in finding out how that works. But as I was editing that video, I was keen to keep that video as it was because I wanted to show the full scientific process and talk about all the error bars and the things that are relevant to the data that I've gathered. But of course, not everybody wants to see that. Hence this video, with a really quick and dirty look at the results themselves and what they tell us we should be doing or should not be doing. Alright, so these are the sensors I used. They're Bluetooth sensors, which makes life wonderfully easy because I can just pair them up with my phone and then interrogate what's going on in the caravan from the comfort of my house, sat on the sofa or just by the front door because we have such a small driveway, so that is very handy indeed. There's a link down in the description below if you want to pick up the same sort of sensors and run the same sort of experiment that I've done, either at home where you can talk to them directly with your phone because they're Bluetooth, or if your caravan or motorhome or camper van or whatever it is stored at a storage yard, then they do hold the data on them. I think it's for about 100 days. So every time you nip up to see it and check it's fine, you can download the data and see what's been going on in your absence. So that is very good indeed. I like that information. Anyway, the proper full-on science, hour and 25 minutes or something video is coming out in, as I said, 50 minutes time after this one. But here's a summary of the results that I've got so you can see what is coming up. And of course, if you've got questions, then please go and watch that. There are chapter headings in that very long film so you can find the relevant bit that you're after, because there's no point me repeating what's in that in this comments here because it won't reach as many people. So if you've got questions, I'm sure other people have, head across to that video, check it out, check the relevant chapter, and you should find your answer. If not, pop a comment in that video's comment section and I'll answer them there rather than here to try and keep everything organized and in the same place. Anyway, here is all the data. So the left axis is the relative humidity that I measured. So blue line for outdoors and red line for the inside of the caravan. Then the difference in the two is the purple line. And you need to read the purple line off of the right hand set of axis. And what you're looking for here is basically the lower the purple line, then the bigger the difference between the internal and the external humidities. So the better the intervention is actually doing something. So the green vertical lines dividing the data are dividing into scenarios. So the different interventions or intervention that I was using for that particular scenario. So that's whether it was desiccant crystals, that's the D, H for heating, U for dehumidifier because D and H were both taken, and then W meaning windows. So whether the windows were on their ventilation clip, so the first clip open, or whether they were closed completely as you would normally have them when you were towing or leaving it in storage. So you can see that I ran all of these things on their own, so all of the interventions separately and then all in conjunction with each other. So 16 different combination of all of these things to see whether they did anything on their own or whether used in conjunction that made the inside of the caravan any drier than it would otherwise be. So I also collected all the what I called the baseline data, so that's the zero interventions or doing nothing scenario, and of course that's the point against which everything is compared because it doesn't really matter what the numbers are. What matters is the difference between doing nothing and doing something. And of course modern caravans are all well ventilated, well insulated, and so the question was, does actually doing anything matter these days? Now, because I've had to use humidity sensors that are designed for wine barrels or cigar storage or precious guitars, storage or that sort of thing, you know, they're not as accurate as thousands of pounds worth of lab grade equipment. So I did have the error of the sensors to contend with, and they are plus or minus 5%. So for a sensor of this nature and that size, that's pretty good, but it's not up to thousands and thousands of pounds worth of lab grade equipment, obviously. So as we've got a plus or minus 5% error on each sensor, and we're looking at the difference between the two sensors, indoors and outdoors, then we need to be looking for differences that are at least plus or minus 10% to be able to say that they are a scientifically valid result. So anything within that may well be a result. There may be an improvement or, in fact, a slight worsening of the conditions within the caravan, but we cannot say scientifically robustly that that is a measurable difference. Plus, if it's less than 10% difference, is it really worth bothering with? And of course, remember, it's 10 percentage points, so it's the difference between 10% humidity and 20% humidity difference, not 10% of the absolute value. So obviously I was also looking out for any indications and any evidence that the conditions inside the caravan were worse than they'd have been if we'd have done nothing at all. So the central green line here that I've drawn on is basically the do nothing scenario, and then we need to pop a line above that is 10% worse than the inside, and a line below that's for 10 percentage points drier than it would otherwise be from doing nothing. So anything between that plus or minus 10% has been blurred out because we can't say it's a scientifically valid result using the instrumentation that we've got. And that leaves us with just three scenarios. The scenarios of desiccant heating and dehumidifier, Windows desiccant and heating, and Windows desiccant heating and dehumidifier. So those are the possibilities. If we look at the three other heating scenarios, they also look like they're more or less about 10 percentage points improvement, but they also occurred at a point of much, much lower exterior humidity. Or perhaps they occurred at the start of the scenario, and I gave each scenario 24 hours to settle down before I counted the last 24 hours as valid results. So there's some uncertainty around those particular heating scenarios, but what's absolutely key, I think, here is that heating occurs in three likely scenarios and three, according to our data, scientifically valid scenarios. So, you know, science usually works with a few rough experiments to narrow down what's important, what's interesting, and then to focus on evolving and improving protocols and techniques. So these experiments are very much in that vein, and bear that in mind as you're looking through the data itself. Now, if we lay the temperature data across the top of the humidity data, then it becomes very clear indeed that Mother Nature is indeed all-powerful here. So hardly surprising. There's also no evidence whatsoever that the desiccated crystals are doing anything useful. So something clearly is happening, otherwise we wouldn't get liquid in the bottom of the vessels every time we put one of these tubs of desiccated crystals in. But basically it just means that the rate at which the moisture is coming out of the air that's contained within the caravan is matched by the rate in which more moist air is coming into the caravan through the vents to replace that stuff that's been removed by the crystals. Do remember, though, that this is my well-insulated, well-ventilated caravan parked in the southeast, so not particularly cold, a little bit damp, and parked in a fairly sheltered condition, so not particularly windy either. Yours might be different, and you might get slightly different results, and especially if you've got an older caravan or one that's very poorly ventilated or poorly insulated. So in my caravan, desiccated crystals are making not a blind bit of difference. They're certainly not making the air any worse, but they're certainly not making it any better either. So this first set of experiments show that there probably is, though, something in leaving the heating on low, not going to the storage yard, whacking the heating on for an hour or two, having a cup of tea, and then shutting the caravan up again. I suspect that will make the caravan just a whole lot damper inside than it would otherwise be. By all means, go to the storage yard on a very dry day, you know, open up the doors and the windows and so on, and that will enable the thing to breathe. But putting the heating on, I suspect, just increases the temperature of the air inside, which probably draws in air from the outside, which will might feel drier to start with, but actually by the time that mass of air has then cooled down after a few hours, it's wetter than it would otherwise be. So these first experiments show there's probably something to putting the heating on. I'm being typically non-committal at this point because it goes against all my scientific training to say there's definitely something on here when I know what level of sensors we've been using and the fact that this is a first experiment. And because I've run through each of these scenarios once, I haven't repeated my data at all. And so there could have been some sort of strange anomaly in the sensor or the reading for that particular scenario. So I'm not prepared to say there's definitely something in it until I've rerun the experiments and I've been able to run each scenario multiple times and we've got a repeatable result that gives very clear values. Then I'm happy to be committal. Until then, it's an indicator. Anyway, one of the things, of course, of leaving the heating on, possibly in conjunction with a dehumidifier, because there are some hints in there that the dehumidifier is doing a lot more good than desiccated crystals, for example. Of course, that will cost quite a lot of money in terms of the electricity bill, and you've got to be in a place to be able to have your caravan plugged in. So I talk about that in the much longer video. I've done a few measurements of the number of kilowatt hours, for example, that our Truma Combi 4E system takes to run the caravan and keep it at the frost protect level, which is 12 degrees in here. So obviously everybody needs to weigh up whether those costs are really worth it, especially given the good insulation and the good ventilation of modern caravans, and as we showed, especially with that temperature data, how all-encompassing and all-powerful Mother Nature is. And on that note, thanks for watching. The very long video should be out now, so do go take a look at some of the more detailed discussion around that if you're interested. Pop any comments on that video and I'll be very happy to answer them there. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. See ya.